So on to the topic of today. In this webinar, we are going to be talking about how to use a food safety plan as a tool to organize and monitor all the policies and practices that you choose to implement as a farm operator to align with the produce safety rule. As Sarah will mention in the webinar, food safety plans, written food safety plans are not required for the FSMA produce safety rule compliance, but they're a really, really good tool to use. Our speaker leading us through this is Sarah Everhart. So Sarah is a senior legal specialist at the Agricultural Law Education Initiative at the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law. Sarah is a graduate of Washington College and a cum laude graduate of Elizabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. She practiced law in Maryland for 9 years prior to joining ALEI. And Sarah Everhart also sits on the Talbot County Soil Conservation Board of Supervisors. So without further ado, Sarah, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Angela, and good afternoon, everybody. So glad you could join us today. Angela and I are excited that this is our last webinar in this series. We've been really happy with how it's come together. And like she said, if you've missed some of the webinars, which is understandable because we made the daring decision to do this throughout the growing season, they're all recorded, and I'll share that link with you at the end about where you can find all of the different webinars. Today, we wanted to put it all together into a food safety plan, and that's really what a food safety plan is all about, pulling all the different pieces of identifying risks, risk assessment, and then coming up with ways to minimize those food contamination risks. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. In case I am a new face to some of you, in case you're not familiar with the Agriculture Law Education Initiative, we are a group of attorneys. We work together. There's 3 different parts of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, and the University of Maryland at College Park. And we get our support from Empowering the State. There's our website handle, and we have a lot of different legal resources on many topics, including but not limited to food safety. So check it out if you've never checked out our resources previously. Okay, and then I'm here today with my Maryland Food Safety Network hat on. And again, we're a group of a lot of different types of folks who come together. We've got scientists from University of Maryland College Park. We've got extension experts like Dr. Shauna Henley, and then we've got our experts from the Maryland Department of Agriculture. So just a quick disclaimer, I am here today to provide education. I am a lawyer, but I'm not giving you legal advice today. Okay, getting down to it, farm food safety plans. So like Angela said, this is not a requirement of the Food Safety Modernization Act's Produce Safety Rule. However, it is definitely recommended. So if you attended a grower training, you probably remember that last part of the training was all about the farm food safety plan. It's also something that is going to be a requirement for some good agricultural practices programs. It's a really important piece of evidence for food safety culture. So what do I mean by that? So a couple of years ago, we did some education where we pulled in experts from the Maryland Department of Health, along with experts from the Maryland Department of Agriculture, and we walked through what it would look like if your farm was part of a food safety outbreak. So basically, if you had been identified as a potential source of contaminated food, and the first thing that the recall team, the experts from the Maryland Department of Health said they would be asking for when they came on the farm was a copy of the food safety plan. So that was really impactful for me. I was kind of surprised by that, especially since it's not a requirement of the produce safety rule. And their explanation was that if a farm has a well-organized food safety plan that's reflective of what's going on in the farm, that is evidence that these people really care about food safety and that they're organized. So that's why I say evidence of a food safety culture. And another really great thing about a food safety plan is it can help you for your internal business planning. So it's going to help you figure out where you are now, what things you can improve on the farm, what would be worth investing some, maybe you need some capital improvements on the farm in order to fully satisfy the things that you have laid out in the farm food safety plan. Definitely a good thing as we're getting into these winter months to kind of step back, reflect when you have potentially a little bit more time on your hands to kind of take a holistic look at your operation and see what things could maybe be tightened up a little bit, or simply what things can you put down to paper, create some standard operating procedures, and we'll walk through some examples of how to do that. And traceability. So we will talk about that here in a couple slides, but having a traceability plan in place, it is going to take a little work on the part of the farmer to get that organized at the forefront. But having that plan, it would be hugely beneficial for you in the situation where you needed to utilize that. If you needed to try to figure out where your food had gone, if you were involved with a recall, it's going to greatly minimize what you're going to have to take out of the marketplace, basically. We'll talk about that today. So it's going to get you organized and hopefully get you focused on food safety, which I know is a concern of a lot of farmers, but obviously you have a lot of other things on your mind as well. So how to go about it and what it's really going to include. It's going to include a description of the risks that you've identified and what actions you plan to take to address those risks. You're going to need to prioritize the most important risk reduction steps. So I know if you've gone through the grower training, sometimes we get feedback that it's a little overwhelming because, we try in those grower trainings to point out as many different areas of risk as possible, and it can be a little much at times. And I think it's important to be educated about the different types of risks, but it's not always possible, right? To address every single one at the exact same time. You might need to be realistic, there's going to have to be a prioritization of what are the most important risk reduction steps that I can take. And then you're going to have those very specific standard operating procedures, which those are just going to be a description of how you're going to address those risks. And like I said, think of it as, something that, yes, it's going to be great to enhance your food safety, but also it's got some business and it's got some business benefits as well. It's hopefully going to help you assess what you've got currently going on and look into the future. All right, so what should your plan include? Breaking it down step by step. So very simply, farm name and address. I would date the plan. That would help you in terms of future revisions, because I'm going to encourage you to think of this as a living document. And by that, I mean something that you review at least annually, have it be part of your winter plans. When you're able to step back and take a breath after your harvest is done or has slowed down at least, revise it annually. So important to date it so you make sure that you're referring to the most current version. Farm description. So a simple description of what types of things you've got growing on the farm, different descriptions of your farm, and this is all going to be, case by case basis. Maps. So I'll show you some example of some maps, but really important to have, at the minimum, a map of the farm itself. Good idea to have a map of your water distribution system, irrigation system, contact information. So depending on how much staff you have on the farm, good idea to have some contact information. If you needed to contact someone after hours, you're going to want cell phone numbers, that type of thing, so you can get somebody 24/7 if something happened. This is a good place to keep all those pieces of contact information for contracted services, suppliers, buyers, that type of thing. Keep it all in one place. Your risk assessments can be part of your food safety plan. Your SOPs, those are your practices to reduce the risks. Traceability procedures, and last but not least, the records to document the practices. So as you learned in the grower training, the produce safety rule does require a lot of records. So food safety plan, not technically required. Records, in many cases are required, and in other cases highly recommended. This is a great place to keep all those records. So, if record keeping is new to your farm, or if some of the records that are now required because of the produce safety rule are new, you might be thinking, what am I going to do with all those records? Have them as a part of your food safety plan so you can refer back to them. So, if you are sitting down to do this winter, what are you going to need? Besides your cup of coffee, you're going to need those contact information, farm maps, and I'll show you some examples. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can do a handwritten map. You can use Google Earth. You can, get more elaborate if you have resources to do that. Production plans. So this is something that you might have up here. This is something that you might have somewhere else, but you're going to want to walk through the production steps. That's really going to help you with that risk assessment. Storage and transportation procedures, all those record keeping logs that we were talking about. So if you keep paper records, those records, if you keep them on an iPad or something like that, have that available. And then another really important thing to have right in your food safety plan is training certificates. So that certificate that you got for attending that grower training, if you're anything like me, sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the pieces of paper you have around your house or your home office. So stick that training certificate in your food safety plan. Also things like pesticide applicator certifications, any certifications that you would need to show someone related to the farm, good place to put them in the food safety plan. So this is just an example of the farm name and description. Not that you need an example of the farm name, but a little example of a description. Just some, a brief paragraph about what's grown on the farm, how it's grown. As you can see, they used a little chart here saying, they grow the salad greens in the high tunnel, 2 acres of tomatoes. You might find that this type of description is useful for marketing as well. If you're applying to sell at a new farmer's market next summer, oftentimes they're going to want a description of your operation. So, hopefully spending a little time on this, you'll end up using it for more than just the food safety plan. Here is an example of a farm map. So, as I said, doesn't have to be fancy. You can, hand draw it. If you've got other resources, go ahead. You can either include the water system right on this farm map. So as you can see on this farm map, they have included some details about the water system. They've got some irrigation pumps noted, or you can have a separate map. So here's a water system map that's more detailed. So you're going to want a water system map that begins with the water source. So, maybe that's your well. Maybe if you're using surface water, that's a pond or a stream, and extends all the way to the last emitter. So include backflow preventers and include hydrant connection points. So Angela is sharing a link about where I got this map from, which gives you a little bit more information. That Michigan State water system mapping resource that I referenced there at the bottom of the slide. It's really helpful for when you're working on this water system map. As an aside, at the Maryland Food Safety Network, it's helpful to have a group of us together because some of us go on farm readiness reviews. And so we all talk to each other about the issues that we're seeing on farms, or just the areas where growers seem to be falling a bit short in terms of complying with the produce safety rule. And your water system inspection is an area that a lot of growers weren't doing before the produce safety rule, and maybe haven't, that little piece is required. I don't know if folks are getting a little confused because some of the water inspection dates have been pushed a couple years, but everyone is required to be doing a water system inspection. And so a water system map can be a helpful tool so that, it's going to force you to make sure you understand how your water system works on your farm if you don't already know that. And, creating this map, when you look at it every year, do an inspection at that time, and then you've satisfied that requirement of the produce safety rule as well. This is a packing house map. So another, important area to assess in terms of risk for cross-contamination. So, where does the produce come into the packing area? So you can see there's an entrance marked on this map. There are rodent traps marked on the map. So that's going to help you, describe your pest control system. You can see all the different areas here, the receiving line, the packing line. So think about when you're doing this map, kind of trace the steps of how you use this area during harvest. Think about the traffic flow. So how are the bins coming in from the field? Where are they, are they being set down at any point? Where are the areas for cross-contamination? So think about it, think about the flow that you have going through the packing area, and if there's any areas that, or any ways that you could minimize risk within the packing house. Okay, so I mentioned contact information. This is probably becoming less and less vital now that more of us have cell phones all the time. However, important to designate one person within the plan to be the lead. So the reason that one of the reasons, it is good to have contact information in there, but it's really, the point of that is to also to assign a leader for this plan. So might be the farm manager, might be the person at the farm who's probably been through a grower training at a minimum, and is going to have a good handle on food safety procedures. Maybe it's the person who's better at paperwork, frankly, and has, the person that sits down and reviews the plan annually and makes sure that everything in the plan is up to date. They're going to need to be supported, obviously, by everyone that works on the farm, and we'll talk about some worker training issues, but important to have kind of one person who's the leader. So if questions come up, there's one central person to go to, may need to have a backup in case that person becomes unavailable. So the authority to make decisions changes, and really to make sure that the plan is implemented. I see your question, Andy. I'm going to let Angela answer that in the chat box. It's a good question about our next grower training. We do have one coming up in January. Okay. So let's start to assess risk. So how are we going to assess risk on the farm? We need to consider production methods. So think about the different things you grow, what you use to grow them, and how you grow them. Organize a risk assessment into production. So, that first step, growing, materials used to grow them. How are those things harvested? So that's a second tier of the risk assessment. Who's harvesting? How are they harvesting? What are they using? How are those bins then moving from harvest and tools to post-harvest? So those are kind of the three main categories that you can break this into if that works best for your operation. You're going to need to think about physical, chemical, biological hazards that could occur in those three different categories. So for each of those things, equipment, tools, vehicles, containers, we'll walk through an example here with harvest containers. Soil amendments, so hopefully you caught our webinar on soil amendments. If you didn't and you use soil amendments on your farm, we did a webinar recently on safe use of soil amendments, pesticides and chemicals using on the farm, and then prior land uses. So this isn't going to be for every farm, but especially for our urban farmers, it's important to think about prior land uses if you're farming in a new area. Underground storage tanks can be an issue for folks. So again, if you're thinking about putting an area into production that you didn't use the season before, thinking about whether or not there's an underground storage tank there, just making sure that that's not going to be an issue for you. Structure conversions. So, we have folks that are starting to grow in structures that weren't previously used for that type of agriculture, such as a poultry house that's being converted into vegetable production. So important to think about those risks also. Okay, so here's a risk assessment example having to do with biological soil amendments of animal origin. That's what the produce safety rule calls, what we typically call compost or manure. So the location of those soil amendments, it's going to need to be assessed. So if you use these on your farm, this is just, some of the considerations that could go into your risk assessment. So where are those things being stored on the farm? Are they being stored in an area where they're not going to be at risk for runoff? Is runoff from the soil amendments does it have the potential to contaminate crops? Are they being stored in a way where we're going to avoid cross-contamination between properly composted compost, meaning, within the parameters of the rule, and maybe, raw manure? We wouldn't want those things close to each other or stored in a way where the cross-contamination could occur. So thinking about the paths of equipment, so like we were talking about with the packing house map, what's the flow in terms of, if you're going to take that compost or take that manure and you're going to apply it on to your produce fields, what's the path of the equipment and the workers that are doing that? Is that a potential for cross-contamination? And then the composting process itself. So making sure that you're doing that in conformance with the rule and that best management practices are being used. Oh, and one last thing with soil amendments before I move on. If you're buying soil amendments from a third party, you might remember this if you tuned into our soil amendments webinar, or remember this from the grower training, but a certificate of conformance is something that you would need. So that's a certificate from the person that you're buying the compost from, saying that it meets the standards of the produce safety rule. And that is a good example of a record that would be a great thing to keep in your food safety plan. Okay, so prioritizing the risks. So we're going to need to decide which risks to prioritize. So risks that can lead to whole crop contamination, clearly those are going to be at the top of your list. Risks that have caused previous outbreaks. So we know that there has been some risks that we read about in the news: contamination from post-harvest water, wildlife fecal contamination. So these are risks that should be ranking pretty high on your list. Do you have some new or modified farm production practices that may increase your risks? So again, this is a good thing to think about during those winter months. Are you going to be hiring new people? Are you going to be growing new types of produce? Are you going to be purchasing new equipment, retrofitting new equipment? Any changes, changing suppliers, that type of thing? That is something that could trigger, that should trigger a risk assessment when you're reviewing your plan, and may change the ranking of the risks. Okay, so we've assessed our risks, we've prioritized our risks, and now we have to figure out how we're going to develop practices to reduce those risks. So what are we going to need? We're going to need people. We always need people, right? There's never enough people on a farm. So time, people, equipment. So you might need some new tools. If you're deciding that you want to separate your tools into harvest tools and tools that only come in contact with biological soil amendments of animal origin, which is one suggestion for preventing cross-contamination, then you're going to potentially need to purchase some new tools, right? If you have done that risk assessment and found that one of your prioritized risks is people, we all know during this time of COVID, everybody's washing their hands very often, which is a good thing to try to keep us all healthy, but it means more soap, more paper towels that are needed on the farm. So if you want to try to, if you're going to put some more hand washing stations on the farm to allow workers to improve their personal cleanliness and reduce some of those human carried risks, then you're going to need to invest in a hand washing station potentially, or just some more soap or paper towels so people have what they need. Create a list, try to do this in a way where it doesn't become too overwhelming. And if it helps, and if you've got the people, designate a person to be in charge of each task. So standard operating procedures, SOPs, it's just step-by-step instructions. So I think this is the part of the plan that probably gets folks a little bit intimidated because they think, I don't really know how to do that. But really all it is explaining probably what you're already doing on your farm, right? Maybe with a few tweaks. So one way to do it, and we'll talk about this, you'll see the example, is if you're struggling to get started and you think, I've never written anything like this before, or I don't really know what to do, walk through the process yourself or watch your workers walk through it. So what do they do when they are cleaning and sanitizing those harvest containers? How are they doing it? Think about writing instructions like you would write a recipe, right? So it's that time of year, we're all thinking about cooking for the holidays. And so sometimes, you go with the old standards that you know how to cook by heart. And sometimes you think, we're going to get fancy this year and try a new recipe. So you pick up that recipe and it's got quantitative amounts of each of the ingredients in the recipe, right? So you know how much to buy. And then it's got very clear steps on, if it's a good recipe, on what you should do to prepare that dish. And that's exactly what these SOPs are going to look like. So it's going to have the purpose of the activity, that's the what, who needs to be involved, why it needs to be done, and then what materials need to be a part of it, and the procedure, how are you going to do it? So here's our example, and I know this is a lot of words for a PowerPoint slide, forgive me, but I wanted to show you the exact suggested language. This is from a Cornell resource that I thought was really helpful, and this is an example for walking through how you would create an SOP for cleaning and sanitizing harvest containers. This Cornell plan, the link's at the bottom and Angela will share it with you. It's a really good example. There's quite a few templates out there for farm food safety plans, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you use a template, it has to be used as just that, a template. So, you can't just adopt somebody else's. You're going to have to tweak it for your operation. But I think this Cornell one is especially helpful because it's got specific references to the produce safety rule throughout. All right, so it starts with the purpose. So what is the purpose of this task? The purpose of this task is how to explain how to clean and sanitize harvest containers. Pretty easy, right? So who needs to worry about this SOP? Who does this apply to? The harvest crew in the field and in the packing house, right? Those are the people that are going to be dealing with these containers. Why does it need to be done? Well, it needs to be done because we have to keep those harvest containers clean, in good working condition, and we need to make sure they're sanitized because we're trying to prevent cross-contamination with the produce. You might think that this one is sort of a really obvious example, but another thing that I wanted to share was we have heard from some of our Maryland food safety partners that cleaning and sanitizing the harvest containers themselves is another issue that they have been seeing popping up on farms. So I think what's happening is growers they're focused on the post-harvest sanitation and the packing house. So they're cleaning and sanitizing a packing line, but they're missing the step of the container themselves. Or itself rather, sorry. And that's really important, right? That's the first container that produce is going to come into contact with. So even though it's in the field, which we know is an inherently, dirty place and subject to the weather and everything else, that's the first thing that produce is going to come in contact with. So important that it's cleaned and sanitized, especially because it's coming into the packing house, right? And bringing in everything that's attached to it into that cleaned and sanitized area. So let's walk through this. And I know it might not be realistic for folks to clean and sanitize after every use, but important to come up with a realistic system for the cleaning and sanitizing of specifically those pieces of equipment that are going out into the field for the harvest. So here's just a list of the materials. So these are the ingredients, right, that we would need to make this SOP work. Soap, Clorox. This is very detailed down to we would need a measuring spoon. We're going to need a plastic measuring cup. One other thing that we see popping up where folks are falling a little short is they're cleaning and sanitizing, but they're not being precise with the mixing of the sanitizer, right? So if you use sanitizer, I'm sure you're familiar, or if you even, use these products in your home, you get the big jug of Clorox and you're only supposed to use a little bit, right? So how much are you supposed to use versus how much water is it going into? Not a very expensive capital expense or infrastructure change here, investment rather, that's the word I was looking for, to buy some, buy the plastic measuring cup that is going to help your workers make sure that they've got that right amount of sanitizer to water. Put the right measuring spoon, on a string right there so they have it. So this one, buckets, brushes, the right nozzle for the hose, and make sure obviously they're using potable water. So again, a lot of words on a slide, but this is just, all the different steps that they would need to do. So the quantitative instructions for this SOP, how much Clorox would need to be mixed into how many gallons of water, and the steps along the way. And if you walk through this yourself, or if you watch your workers walk through it, I think it's going to help you identify things that maybe you could, improve, or just make sure that things are being done the right way. So you're spraying off the dirty harvest tools and containers using the hose. You're removing dirt, leaves, and outside the packing house entrance on the concrete washing pad. So you would want to make sure that where those dirty harvest containers are being washed off, that's a proper area, that the hose isn't spraying dirt into some place where that could potentially be causing cross-contamination, that there's a good place for your workers once they've used the water and the soap, they've done the cleaning step. Now it's time for the sanitizing step. And where are they going to put that container once it's been treated with the sanitizer, right? So there's going to be a designated area where the water with the sanitizer in it can be properly disposed of. And then there's specific instructions about holding the container upside down, rinsing it with potable water, shaking out the excess water, and then putting them in a designated area. So, you can use tape on the floor, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're putting the sanitized container in, that your workers are putting that in the area where you want them placed so that they can drip dry. And then the final step here is just to make sure that there's also a record being kept of this. So, you've taken all these steps, you've created this great SOP, your workers are following the instructions and doing things how they need to be done. Make sure that you don't slip up on the record keeping step. So this is I like this picture with this harvest container. It looks very clean and sanitized there. And then that little table that it's on there, that would allow it to dry after it had been cleaned and sanitized. So there's different areas of priority within this picture here in the packing house. The harvest container is going to be number one in that ranking. So don't forget about that number one, the harvest container. Also important, obviously, to clean and sanitize those other, the grater there and the other pieces of equipment where that produce is going to have contact. And I like this last step here on the SOP. If you're the farm manager, or if you're the contacts person for this food safety plan, you're going to want to, always a good idea to add a step at the end saying, if there's anything that needs replacing, if we run out of Clorox, if you see that a harvest container is cracked or in bad condition, tell the farm manager about that, right? So you want to make sure that there's open lines of communication between the worker and the manager so that this can all keep functioning properly. So good to just have that in there so that they understand that you want that type of information from them. can be handled a number of ways. If other folks can, have handled it in terms of like a bulletin board and a piece of paper. So if that's how you want to handle it, leave me a note before you leave at the end of the day saying we need more Clorox, we need more soap. As long as there's a procedure in place, it's whatever works for your farm. So really great to spend some time and get this, very detailed in your food safety plan, but consider also posting it on your farm right where the task is being completed, right? So if you're anything like me, even if you have made the dish 20 times, you still probably need to look at the recipe. Memories fade. So important to think about placing these standards of operating procedure around your farm so that workers can refer to them while they're doing the task. Maybe you've got some new people, or maybe people just haven't, have slipped their mind over those winter months and they're back in the spring working for you. So you can put it in a plastic sheet, duct tape it to a wall, whatever works on your farm. But, good to have it right there so that people can make sure that they're doing these things appropriately. And, tell them, look, you're the one doing this every day. If you think of a better way to do this, or if you think that we need to change this in any way, be in touch with me. The SOP can change, the food safety plan can change. It's constantly evolving. Keep all that documentation of those SOPs in the plan. The implementation of this, it's going to require you as the food safety manager monitoring to make sure that these things actually take place and keeping an eye on those records. So the records, like I said, can be useful to you. They're going to help you identify outliers. So if shortfalls are discovered, change things, change the procedures. It's going to help you realize where things need to be improved. Questions about any of that before we move on to traceability? Okay, we'll keep moving. So traceability, basically this just means we want to be able to identify where the produce came from, one step back on the farm, and then where it went after it left the farm, one step forward. So we often say we're tracing one step back and one step forward, and that's what we mean by that. So what field was this grown in? That's our one step back. What day was it harvested? Who harvested it? If you have certain harvest crews. And then to whom was it sold? Sometimes we get folks who do a lot of direct marketing and they think, well, I don't know who bought my product, right? I sell at a roadside stand or I sell at a farmer's market. I don't have any way to do that one step forward. There are ways to do traceability with something like a roadside stand or a farmer's market sale. You can trace in terms of what was sold that day at that market or what was sold that day at that stand. So don't count it out if you do a lot of direct marketing and you think that you can't have a traceability plan. You can, and we're happy to help you with that. It's gonna be very valuable to you in the case of a foodborne illness outbreak. So if you're not able to trace one step forward and one step back, and the worst happens and you're involved in an outbreak investigation, you would have no way to know, right, what of your product you need to recall. And it would be very challenging, and depending, you might have to recall, virtually everything that you have out there. It would be pretty economically damaging to you at that point. Okay, so think about it as, in a form of something that's really going to help your business and benefit you internally. So how do you do this? You're going to need to come up with a code system. It's really the only way to make this work. So you're going to need to code things by lot. So what is a lot? It's just a distinct portion of your product. So it might be one commodity that's harvested on the same day from the same field. May require you to establish a clean break between lots. So a clean break is just a full cleaning and sanitizing between a segment of your product going through your packing house. So, we've harvested carrots today. We're bringing the carrots in from the field. We're putting them through our packing line. We're putting them in containers to go to the farmer's market this Saturday. And then we're going to stop. We're going to clean and sanitize. And then we're going to bring in all Brussels sprouts. So because we've done cleaning and sanitizing between those two segments of produce, we've established a clean break. And now those are separate lots. You're going to need to come up with a system. Can be numbers or letters. I'll show you an example here in a second. But you're trying to come up with a system where you can do that one step back. So being able to identify the farm, field of origin, harvest date, as specific as you can get. This is all going to be sort of a spectrum based on how big your operation is. So, if you don't have anything in place, you can start, relatively simple. And then as you expand, things are going to get, more complex. Can be a sticker, can be a stamp. Here is an example of a lot code. So I liked this example a lot. This is from a Produce Safety Alliance resource. They have these on-farm decision trees, which I think are really useful. And this is one on traceability. So if you want to establish a lot code, this would be a good resource for you to check out. So as you can see, this is the lot code for this product. And I'm sure, you've seen these on produce before, and, maybe you weren't sure exactly what all these things were indicative of, but, commodity type, field, harvest date, harvest crew, so if you only have one crew, you don't, necessarily need to include harvest crew on your lot code for now. Packing date, packing crew, and, most people like to use this Julian dating system where every day of the year has just one number. And so this is going to provide you with that information that you need. Okay, so how do you test the one step forward part of traceability? In order to do that, you can do a mock traceability or recall exercise. And so to do this, you're just going to want to choose one item and quantity that has left your farm. Notify the buyer, tell them that you're doing a mock recall so you don't incite any panic. And you're doing this exercise to test your traceability system to make sure that you don't need to make any improvements. And so you're going to ask the buyer if they can identify some product that was received from your farm. So, this is one example. We've chosen to recall this specific lot number. You received 4 cases. Can you let us know how many cases you have in stock and how many have been sold? So this is, you're going to look at your own internal records. They're going to look at their records. And this is going to be the way that you can figure out if your traceability system is working. Can you trace things forward and back? Document it that you've done this and improve your procedures and your plans. So if you see that there's hiccups in this, if this didn't work for you, don't get discouraged. Think about, where the breakdowns were and how you can improve things. Much better to go through this in an exercise and make sure that you are able to do this before you have to do it in a high stress, situation where, you think your business is potentially at risk here and there's, product out there that could be making someone sick. So, I know this doesn't sound like the most fun thing to do with your time this winter, but if you've got a traceability system, good idea to test it out and make sure it's working. We have some great resources at the Agricultural Law Education Initiative for creating a model recall plan and a model recall plan. I encourage you to look at these. We've got mock recall exercises in there similar to what you just saw, and we've got a lot of record keeping templates in there as well. So we did that in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health. It's these are good resources, and some retailers require you to have a recall plan. Like I know Whole Foods was requiring growers to have one. So if you are required to have one, or if you're interested, check out those resources. Angela will share that link in the chat box. Okay, records. So again, I wanted to provide you the link to the Produce Safety Alliance's record keeping. There's a great resource that has an explanation of the records you need to keep and templates. You don't have to use the Produce Safety Alliance's templates. However, they're good to use because they have all of the blanks for the information that's required by the rule. So another thing that folks have been coming up short with is all of your produce safety rule records are supposed to have the farm name and address signed by the person that observed the action. So, you know, not all of the records that folks had been keeping on their farm had that level of specificity. So if you use those templates, you know, the blank's there, so you'll fill it in and you'll be more likely to comply with the rule. Also, other things like I talked about before, things such as a certificate of conformance related to your compost purchasing, water testing results, hadn't really talked about that, but if you're getting into water testing, keep your water testing results right with your food safety plan, food safety certifications, things like that. Okay, so you might also be going through an annual audit process. So, you know, if you have a GAP certification, you're going to have an annual audit. You know, other folks, retailers might be requiring you to go through an audit. So it's going to be a great way and a great time for you to pull out that food safety plan and make sure that there's no improvements that need to be updated, or updates or improvements to the plan rather. What do you need? Are there things on the farm that you need to buy to support compliance with the plan? So we're only going to be as good as the tools that we have, you know, to put these things in action. So use that annual audit if you're going through an audit. If you don't, set yourself a time to do an annual review to just make sure that things are in place and that there's not things that could be added. So just to wrap it up, don't be aspirational in your food safety plan. This is not time to have a creative moment. You want to be realistic in your plan and document what's actually happening. Doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be long, does have to be something that's revisited. Shouldn't be dusty when you pull it off the shelf, right? Should be something that you're looking at least annually. And think about prioritizing those risks and really focusing on reducing the risks that you can. So here's some templates. So we have a good agricultural practices food safety plan template, which is great. The Produce Safety Alliance has a whole web page of a lot of different templates, which can be really helpful. And this is a great way to get started. Here's all the links for all of the webinars that we have done in this series. So we have, all the members of our team have really worked hard on this series. So if you haven't caught all of these, next time you have a cold, rainy day, sit down and watch a couple of these. Hopefully they will help you. We really tried to give people applicable information and go into some details that we just simply don't have the time to go into during the grower training. And with that, I encourage any of you to get in touch with me. We've got a whole team of people willing to help you, so we're always available to help growers with any questions they might have. I will stop sharing my screen and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for a very, very wonderful and thorough explanation of how a food safety plan can be used to people's advantage. At this time, I'd like to open it up into the, for the rest of the participants. Does anybody have a question for Sarah? We had two really nice ones during the presentation, so thank you, Andy, and thank you, Billy, for asking those questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It is 1:01, so we want to be respectful of everybody's lunchtime. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email Sarah, feel free to email me, log on to ALEI, the website, and you can find contact information there as well. But we hope that this was informative for you and just a little bit fun. So with that, we'll close the webinar for today. I don't know, Sarah, do you have anything else to add?
I don't. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
Yes. Stay safe, everyone.